My family moved to the United States of America when I was about 10, and I didn't leave until I was 27. So that's a key formative years of my life in the United States of America. Most of those initial ones as a child, 10-year-old growing up, teen, getting into the teens and whatnot, was in Bethesda, Maryland, Montgomery County, right in the suburbs of DC. And then I went to college in Wheeling, West Virginia, above Wheeling, West Virginia, in West Liberty, West Virginia, to be specific, and saw a different part of America. So that's the capital city, suburbia, built up in that kind of sense. Later on, I found out it was one of the wealthiest. It's one of the wealthiest counties in the United States of America. Then small town West Virginia, in the hills of West Virginia, and seeing that part where you're meeting people who haven't left their town of 500 until they got to college or something like that. And just seeing those different aspects of America got me thinking too, where would I fit in? Now that my parents were heading out, had left, they were done with their diplomatic mission at the posting at that time. So I'm seeing me with this background that I had, born in France, Kenyan, lived in Kenya and whatnot. Do I fit into what America is? What is America anyway? And at that time, I started realizing like the rest of the world can't even be like America because of the amount of consumption that was being done in America, the way people were living on credit, the way there were certain things where America is a lot of resources to run America the way it was because a lot of things that imported in, not just the goods, but also whether you like it or not. Some people may not like it, some people may support it. There's a lot of migration of people not having as good a time in another place, deciding let's come to America and be in America. But also there's other aspects where those people come to America and they can do more by virtue of being in America. So what is it about America itself that would convert things like that? So I started wondering, can the rest of the world be like America? And that time I thought no. And then through a bunch of other things happening, end up leaving and have spent some time bouncing back and forth between Kenya and the United States of America. And right now, in my older self, as I'm looking now, setting up some businesses here, instead of focusing, how do I get back there? If I do want to get back there, need to set the foundation where I'm at already and then connect those things together as it's part of my life. But one other thing I realized about America since then is part of this project made America 250, the 250th anniversary of what is relatively a young country when it comes to how old countries are in general. Kenya is much younger, like about 60 years old or something like that. I know my parents were born, at least my dad was born, before Kenya was even independent. But you have countries like the United States of America. And I was wondering, okay, so the rest of the world can't be like America. But recently I realized America isn't even like what most Americans think America is like. Too many people are focused on the American dream. Whereas dreams can give you some guidelines, but you can't live an actual dream. You have to wake up eventually. But in my estimation, I think the American reality is still something exceptional. It is still something worth knowing about, worth teaching, worth believing in, worth aspiring to in that kind of sense. And this Made America 250 series is kind of a process of me doing that to kind of sort out how much do I actually want to get back to the United States of America? What is this America to begin with? Because I believe that problems occur not because of what X is, but rather how we define X. And this is going to be my process of trying to define the good and the bad about the American reality. And I hope y'all just come along with me on this. Now that I've introduced what America 250 is, let me tell you a bit about the how I'm going to do this. I broke up the 250 years of America into decades, and for every decade, I'm going to highlight a person, place, or project that I think made America what I think of when I say this is America. Don't show the area. It's not. It's not that. That is part of it in some ways, though. There are good and bad parts because on the reality aspects of it, there's a positive and the negative. And I think America is relatively young for countries. It's not as young as countries that were colonized. Like in Kenya, I think my dad was actually born before Kenya was even independent, and my mom was like right around the time. But you have countries like America, which I define it as one of the first post-myth countries. It's an older country that is one of the first post-myth ones because you actually had the ability to start having actual history. It was actually not just like some story that was told. Think about Rome, think about Greeks, like the Greece gods. When you have those kind of things, you have a situation where you have Rome and Romulus. Might get those Rome. I think it was one of them. Romulus was the other one. Maybe I'm saying that wrong. There's two kids who supposedly established Rome, and they were raised by wolves. That's not really what happened. We know that's not really what happened. When you go and you talk to the Greeks, it's a descendant from Greek gods and that stuff, the fables and stuff that is tied into that. Even when you come to some more recent stuff, there's the gods, like the New Republic from France or something. I was talking to one of my friends, he's Haitian American Kenyan, lives in Kenya now. I was talking to him about this project and talking about this whole idea of it. And he was like, there was a chance France was. I was like, yeah, with the New Republic, because there was a way that they were actually ending the whole like royals who came down and these were God's agents on earth, and they had that blessed power, that noblesse oblige to like guide people in that kind of way. And then they had the whole situation of the revolutions and literally chopped the heads off of these people, brought them down to earth. So there was a chance of them to establish now like a human-made republic, but then some of those people got back in control and things got muddled up. But I think in the United States of America, in that sense, the founding fathers, the founding people of that nation, it was founded by human beings. And that has a positive and negative. Then you carry on other aspects of the country with the freedom of speech and the ability to discuss and talk about the good and the bad. In general, people prefer focusing on the good when it comes about the past. Don't speak ill of the dead. But then in the present, there is a thing of highlighting the bad. But then the people in power in the present often are against you actually highlighting those bad things. So those two things come together where there's a lot of really cool stories about the history of it. But in the present, you also have the ability to talk about the bad. And a lot of that has been done more recently. I think there's a lot of aspects you can complain about the United States of America, but I think it is one of the most honest countries, nations that I've seen about the bad parts about the country. Every country has them. Every civilization has had them. All our historical ancestors compared to how we are today, because human flourishing is a thing that gladly happens and we improve. By definition, they're just a lot worse human beings than we are. But they still did some relatively amazing things compared to some of us in our day-to-day average lives with our better morals and ethics. But the actual achievements and things like that we are thankfully able to live in the world that we live in today is thanks to some people who might have not been as good. Personally, if you brought them here today, some things didn't happen as well as they would if they existed today. Some projects might have not had the best intentions, but regardless, had some positive results. Those are kind of the things I want to start talking about and focusing on this. And we'll start this off with George Washington himself. And just when I thought about this, I thought of this Chappelle skit that y'all may have seen. Maybe I'll put some clips in here.
If I went back in time with a white person and we saw George Washington walking in front of our time machine, my white friend would probably be like, oh my God, Dave, look, there's George Washington. It's the father of this great nation. I'm going to go shake his hand.
As you can see, on one aspect, there's that positive, the good, the mythologized version of him. And then there's also...
I'd be on the other side like, run, George Washington. And we'd both be right.
There's also those aspects of the reality of who George Washington was. And there were some certain things where just clearly founding a nation like the United States of America is a more positive thing with at least what it was intended to be compared to what's out there and what it's become. That intention or the serious act of fighting against that tyranny and establishing what that is. Few of us have done something as grand and as memorable and as commendable as something like that, whether or not you agree with what has resulted from it. I think we can safely kind of say that. But also, since most of us live in places where slavery has long been abolished, and it's not even just the abolition, it's just we've been raised in certain ways where this thing that was practiced for most of human history is just a thing that we just can't think we'd actually do, makes us already ethically and morally better than somebody who had to somehow live in a mindset where that was a thing that they considered to be a positive part of their life or a thing to do in their life. And I am with the estimation that regardless of how evil someone is, thing somebody does, they have convinced themselves it is better for me at this moment to do this evil thing or this thing X rather than not X, regardless of what the X is. There's some people who might have some mental handicaps or situations where that's a different kind of thing. But in most cases, I think that's a thing. So George Washington, for whatever reasons, thought that slavery was an okay thing for him to still do on a day-to-day basis and to not have that as a key part of this new nation that he started. But he still thought that the tyranny that he thought him and the other colonialists, people in the colonies, were experiencing from the British government was not something they could stand for, and they had a better idea of how you could run societies. And regardless of my objections to how states are right now, I do think that was an improvement on what was there before. So, for America 250, made America 250, the first person is George Washington. And I'm just going to hit the speed drawings on the actual screen. I said divided into 10 years. There's going to be merchandise, a link to merchandise right now. The Redbubble store, you're going to find access to it. Anything I put on the Redbubble store, I think will just stay there. But I'm going to have limited numbers of these. I'm eventually going to find people to print these shirts and ship them in the United States of America, in the process of looking at that and trying to find somebody here locally in Kenya. And then I'll probably cut it down to maybe just t-shirts. I'll have the hats done somehow, but maybe I'll have some limited runs of these. I want to cut them down to either 25 per or 250 per, some sort of way that way. And maybe I'll just put this money together, get a visa, and save it for like eventual ticket back to the States and see some of that kind of stuff with this. Not quite sure what I'm going to do with the proceeds, or I'm just going to be like, I need to make money too. So it might just be part of that. But I think I will have limited runs for these. But to go along with this, to highlight the man George Washington is, I went to georgewashington.org, and I'm just going to read his biography, and that will go with the speed drawing. And like I said, there's positive and negative things about this human being that did this. Let me know in the comment section what kind of person you think he was, the positives and negatives, what other people, projects, and places that you think would be good to highlight in this. I have some in mind already. I have maybe 10 of the days where I'm like, I have to have, for 10 of those decades, these things have to be there. But I'm malleable to switch around, and I also might go back in after I'm done with these 25 weeks of this and actually have additions to this if people make good enough cases for this. And you could also just make some of your own in this kind of thing and just tag them or send them to me or something, and I'll add them to the series or something. Okay. So, George Washington, the first American general, president, and national hero, was born in rural colonial Virginia on February 22nd, 1732. After the early death of his father, a young George Washington, only 7 years old at the time, learned the ways of farming and planting, as he became the primary owner of his family's plantation farm. He stayed at home throughout his early teenage years, helping his mother run the family estate. You see, generally that stuff, you think, okay, that's kind of positive. It sucks that his father died. But then, yeah, he was born into the plantation farm. And that's kind of something that a lot of us have done that. We've been born into certain situations, and how much have we done to change the situations we were born in that might have been negative? How much have we done to improve the situations? How much have we done to maintain the situations? Because we know a lot of times where somebody is born with some privileges, some benefits, some legs up on the average person, and they let those go. So I think there is just general estimation to say, okay, what are the circumstances this person came into? What did they do actively as an agent to maintain or change those circumstances? That's something worth paying attention to. Okay, next paragraph. At the age of 15, George became a surveyor. He was able to land this prestigious job through vital connections that his brother, Lawrence Washington, possessed. Lawrence Washington was close partners with the wealthy Colonel William Fairfax, a wealthy Virginian politician and landholder. After receiving a good word from the influential Colonel Fairfax, George Washington not only became a successful surveyor, but also was placed in a position to gain land and political positions. Upon the death of his brother Lawrence, George achieved his first political position in Virginia's Northern District. Furthermore, Colonel Fairfax took the young Washington under his wing as a role model and a sort of surrogate father, fostering in the ambiguous George Washington a yearning to also learn about the art of war. Following a failed attempt to enter the British Royal Navy, thwarted in part by George's mother, Washington finally got a chance to serve in the militia. Much of the surveying work that George did was for the Ohio Company, operated by the Fairfax family. A dispute between France and Great Britain over western lands in Ohio Territory prompted Fairfax to send Washington on a scouting expedition to the lands in question. His mission was to deliver notice to the encamped French forces that the land was claimed by the British. Straying from his original orders, the impulsive young commander led an attack on a French scouting party. Not only was this attack Washington's first taste of the battlefield, it was crucial in sparking the 7 Years' War, between the two main colonizers of North America, France and Britain. Yeah, so that's I guess impressive. A process of knocking down dominoes, and that's one thing I was wondering. I think I might need to do like an addendum to this to what led up to even the founding. Could be like pick maybe like 5 different people, incidents, some people, places, and projects that led up to it that might be significant. But right now, I'll just focus on after the founding. Upon returning to Virginia, Washington joined the British Imperial Army, serving under General Braddock. It was during the 7 Years' War that Washington first achieved a hero status on the battlefield during his mid-20s. In one account, General Braddock and his army walked into a French and Indian ambush. As British officers rapidly fell in the battle, George Washington remained alive, surviving bullet holes in his jacket and horse being shot out from underneath him. He did his best to carry out the wounded General Braddock's orders for the remainder of the tragic battle. Although the battle was a horrific loss for the British forces, Washington returned to Virginia as a war hero. Although his status was not fully merited, due to Washington's significant lack of military knowledge, it helped to boost his popularity in the eyes of both the public and the prominent. And you see already, just even the writing here, the public and the prominent. The prominent, there's always been that elite class in any sort of society, any sort of culture that is separate from the public. And I think we're seeing that something in the United States of America right now, where the politicians, the literati and the politirati are not definitive of who the people are. I have a series, and this man will feature in this series, one President Donald J. Trump, about how he is in one way such definitively a result of only in America can a being like Trump be created. So he's an embodiment of certain parts of America, but he isn't all of what America is, clearly. There's parts of America that utterly detest him. And of course, some people can argue, do those people even care about what America is? Or are they trying to change America? But America is a place that can have changes, can have different facets into it. And that's something we will be discussing and I will be highlighting and going over in this series. Okay. But yeah, so the nation, the prominent are not often definitive of what the X actually is. I don't think it's that's the case. And you can look pretty much anywhere and see that. Okay, after the end of the 7 Years' War, Washington returned to civilian life with his marriage to a wealthy Virginian widow named Martha Dainridge Custis. George's marriage to Martha united both of their already wealthy estates. Therefore, Washington spent much of his time after the war tending and expanding his vast estate. Moreover, the newly famous Washington re-entered politics as a representative of the Virginia House of Burgesses. However, life during this time of peace was short-lived, as the pivotal encounters with the British at the battles of Lexington and Concord soon propelled the American colonies into the Revolutionary War against their mother country, Great Britain. In June 1975, George Washington was... Before I continue, actually, the parts now right here is kind of what I'm talking about with a post-myth sort of culture and society and nation that was invented. Because a lot of the things we've mentioned here are things that you actually have even about the human parts of these countries. Like after Rome was founded, it still existed with actual humans. It wasn't too much of like, oh, this Caesar was also raised by a wolf. They're like, okay, this was how we branched from myth, from completely the supernatural into the human that way. And then these people are descended from that. But then you still have certain stories. Like there's one story of like Caesar being caught by like some pirates or something. And then he was like treating them well. And it's like, oh, he befriended them somehow. And not exactly what the story is. And he leaves. And then he comes back and like massacres all of them for like keeping him hostage and things like this. But like some of those stories, like you can't really differentiate the myth from the reality. Like, did he really do that? Or is that just something that was written in the past? But when you talk about some of the people from the first person, the father of the state, George Washington, the one who established all of this, you have like times where it's just like, yeah, he's just chilling like a regular human being. You have letters and accounts of just these human lives, the human foibles of the person. Like the simple one, people say like he had like wooden teeth because his teeth had fallen out. So these things, like very human aspects of these people are still alive, yet we still say, okay, they still did great things. So there's the ability to just completely mythologize these characters is not as realistic, and that's why you can get a more realistic take on it. When you come and you're talking about places like here in Kenya, like some of the founding fathers, like recently we had President Uhuru Kenyatta, then Raila Odinga recently passed, and their fathers were like the founding fathers, like Uhuru Kenyatta, Raila, no, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta was the first president of Kenya, and then he was in the people who fought the Revolutionary War or fought the war against the colonials, against the British. Again, the British were in many places, and then Raila Odinga's dad, Jaramogi Odinga, he was also part of those people fighting, and he's been constantly back and forth. I think he was the first like vice president or vice president or something. But so you have the people, the families of the people who founded the nation are still alive, still have some power, still have some established things. So you're still living in the developing, in the growth, in the establishment of the nation. I think your average Kenyan doesn't really have the identity of what a nation is in that sense, but America is already built up like the highest. You don't have clans, you might have some state kind of things, southern, northern, but in general, most Americans have some sort of definition of our identity to what America as a nation is, and that is established from these very human sort of people. And of course, here, like they're so human, we can see them walking around on a day-to-day basis and things like that. Okay, so continuing with this. In June 1775, George Washington was appointed the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Washington's experience as the commander of the colonial forces was a mixture of success and failure, embarrassment and glory. One of his most significant losses was the capture and occupation of New York City by British forces. The loss of this major colonial city greatly frustrated Washington, but every latter attempt he made to retake New York either failed or never materialized. On the other hand, his two small victories at Trenton, New Jersey and Princeton, New Jersey were crucial in both mending Washington's reputation as a war general and in boosting morale among the rebel colonial forces and civilians. After several other key victories with the aid of the colonies' foreign ally France, the British ended the Revolutionary War and relinquished their control of the American colonies with the signing of the Treaty of Paris at Yorktown, Virginia, on September 3rd, 1783. So now with this one, recently, as we see, even at the establishment of the United States of America, that whole dream idea of just America just being this power that just militarily does everything, despite it spending the most on the military right now, having different arms, it's still struggling. It's struggling in Iran. It's struggling to support Project Ukraine. This thing's not going its way. You saw how the pullout from Afghanistan war, and I'm saying that's the government. That's certain people. It's not the entire nation. The American people, most of the people probably don't support these things as much as certain people with the ability to initiate these things do. But the wins and the losses happened from the founding, and they still exist now. It's not just win, 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 win all the time, despite of how Trump talks about, are you tired of winning? There are some things right now that you can say Trump is most definitely losing at, despite how much he just puts his head down and just keeps that whole messaging out of this is the marketing of the win, win, win America sort of thing. And then some people were, of course, mocking him about the Treaty of Versailles being signed after the World War One, and then that led to Hitler taking power and the rise of the Third Reich and things like that. Like, oh, that same thing is going to happen with this MOU that is maybe possibly thrown out now as I'm recording this. I don't know what's going on with that. But you could also have this whole thing where France has just been a regular kind of place where people sign stuff. And you could also be like, oh, it's 250 years. We had the MOU now. And then that's also calling back to the discussions that were done in Paris. And like that. But yeah, there's just so many ways to tie these stories together. And again, that's what life is. Life is telling stories about things. And America, I think, has one of the best marketing, grandest stories that are told in current timeline. It is very culturally influential. And that's part of this series that we're kind of going through here, that I'm kind of going through with y'all who are thankfully listening to me, if you're still listening to me. Last paragraph now. Following the conclusion of the American War for Independence, George Washington initially refused to become the nation's leader and instead returned to civilian life in order to tend to his suffering estate. However, Washington did shortly accept the invitation to run for office of the first president of the United States of America. At the age of 57, he became the only U.S. president to receive every vote of the Electoral College. George Washington served 2 terms as president, afterwards retiring for one last time to his home at Mount Vernon. The United States' first president, icon, and national hero died in his home on December 14th, 1799. Nowadays, George Washington is recognized as the most admired founding fathers of the United States of America, along with Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. So that's it. That's the first entry in this one, and also mentions who the second entry is going to be. It's going to be Thomas Jefferson. And right after I'm done recording this, I'm going to go and do the drawing for that, the speed drawing that's going to go for that, so I can be posting that. I'm going to be posting those. Let me check the day of that. I'll be releasing the ones in this series every Saturday. We'll try to maintain that schedule. Did the George Washington one up on my Redbubble store. Did like a short for it on July 4th, 2026. So every Saturday I will be posting the next person into it. But yeah, like I said, give me suggestions of times, places, people, projects that you think made America in these 250 years. Please give me some analysis. Am I doing a crappy job of highlighting these people? Are they people I missed, things that I missed? Am I being too jaded about it? Am I also subject, because I lived in America, we've all lived in like some cultural influence of it. We've seen the propaganda, we've been propagandized, we've been marketed to. We have that ability to just look in history and see things in different ways. So let me know things that I missed, things that you think should be part of this series, and I might switch some of the things around as I'm going. But yeah, so just let me know. You don't have to be American to participate in this. I'm not American. Might be culturally I'm relatively American. Had one of my really good American friends who I think is like very definitively American saying I was pretty good representation of Americans. So tip of my hat to him. He knows what I'm talking about. But anyway, so I'll be doing this series. Let me know what y'all think. Let me know who should be in it. Give me some criticisms. Give me some praise if you think there's praiseworthy things. I've done a good job of something. But yeah, so till next time, made America 250. This is the first one, George Washington. We got 24 more to go. Guys, gals, and everybody else in between. Till next time, goodbye.